I will meet with anyone for 15 minutes. If someone sends me a cold LinkedIn message and it's actually thoughtfully written and isn't just like, hey, like, let's speak, I will take 15 minutes, say, here's my number, call me at this time. And it's kind of a test. It's a very challenging problem. When you're going from one product to platform, it's like, what is the next product? Like, you need to make it as easy as possible. You really want to build with your customers.
Welcome to Change Order, a series where I'm going to be sitting down with some of the most important leaders across the largest markets in the American economy. Today, I'm sitting down with Arthur Levy, the Chief Business Officer at Brex. I've known Arthur for 9 years, and he's one of the most successful VCs turned operators that I've met throughout the course of my career. Art Levy, Chief Business Officer at Brex and longtime friend. Welcome to Change Order.
Thanks, Jason. Very delighted to be here. Very excited.
And welcome back to New York City.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. once said, with most people, life is like backgammon, half skill and half luck. Do you agree?
So, really coming out of the gates with a curveball. I love that. No, as a prolific, and I would use the term prolific, not lightly, backgammon player, I would say backgammon is 70% skill, 30% luck.
Wow. All right. Well, speaking of skill or luck, I'm not sure which one I'm gonna throw here. I think one of the best decisions you've made over the course of your career was jumping over to Brex. And when I think about people who have gone from VC to operator, I think about three people: Connor over at Service Titan, Brandon over at UiPath, and then Art Levy. Give us the inside baseball. Like, how did you end up over there?
Yeah, and just a quick plug for Los Angeles, given my friend Connor lives there as well. It sounds like if you want to be a successful VC operator, you have to move to LA, would be because 2/3 of those people.
True. Or Miami now with Deer, but yes, I think that might have been for tax purposes.
So I guess your question being like, what made me jump, or what do I think has made it?
Let's start. How did you end up over there?
Yeah,
I want the inside baseball,
inside baseball,
detail by detail.
Yeah, so I think that the jump from investing to operating is one that I think people don't, like, everyone thinks, oh, you're an operators make good VCs and vice versa, and investors. And I think that's not at all true. I would say that the skill set, depending on the stage of investment, is actually a good match, or it can be a very bad match.
How so?
So for me, I didn't like investing because I was doing late stage investing at a family office, which was, I guess, not exciting enough for me, I would say. I think Warren Buffett says at one point that, like, he calls himself lazy, I think, in actually some things that he says, because he's just waiting for like a fat pitch, and otherwise he's on the sidelines. I'm an in the arena type of guy, and so I want to be doing and making progress. Now, that can be actually a bit dangerous at times, right? Because people mistake motion for progress. But still, at a company, every month you can look back and say, not every day, but every month, hey, like, what did I do this month? Did I contribute to the P&L? Did I do a partnership? Did I build a product? And that's one of the reasons Brex from an early stage had monthly reviews. But taking a step back, how did I get there? So I was in investing at a family office, and I kind of immediately knew it wasn't for me. And so what did I do was I decided to befriend all of the VCs in New York City. And, Jason Shuman, young rising star, was near the top of my list.
Too nice.
And basically my thesis was, hey, I'm not sure this investing thing's for me, but I want to join a company, and these guys have been doing investing longer than me. I think they're going to know good companies. So it was both like, hey, for my family office, but I also knew that we were late stage, so maybe the fit wasn't going to be there. But mostly for myself, it might be a good opportunity. So, I befriended you. I befriended another legend who Ryan Schmeiser, and I knew some of the West Coast VCs, Neil Shaw at Green Oaks, basically everyone in our sort of age cohort. I'm a bit older than you. I don't disclose my age, obviously, for cosmetic purposes, but, I take good care of myself, Jason, as you know.
Of course.
So basically, I kind of put the word out that I was looking to join a company in basically a utility role. And actually, it turned out to be from a a longtime acquaintance of mine, a guy named Michael Tannenbaum, who you know, that actually flagged, hey, I just joined, or I've been at this company, Brex, you know, you should meet the guys. And so I had great respect for Michael because I think he really beats to his own drum and had been very successful at SoFi. We actually met when I was living in San Francisco. And so he said, hey, think we're doing something interesting. You should meet Enrique and Pedro. So I flew to SF basically the next day. I think that's the other thing I would say is one of the things I take very seriously is like getting on a plane and meeting someone like at a moment's notice.
So important, by the way.
So important. I think people, it's also the way I run my meetings is I think that you have to always, or as much as you can, convenience yourself to the other person's schedule. Honestly, I do that even if I think like I'm the like more tenured person, like let's say I'm doing a partnership with a company that's smaller than me. But like if I want to do it and they're only giving me 2 times, like I'll try to make it work. I'm not going to make a big hubbub. So Enrique's like, hey, like let's meet in SF on Monday. Great. This was a Friday. Cool. So I went out there and basically I pitched them on, hey, like I have a good network. I've kind of towed the line between investing, operating. I want to kind of jump in both feet here. And the first role for me actually came directly from my experience at the family office, which was quite ironic that my master plan kind of worked in that it was, hey, get every VC firm to refer Brex to their customers, to their portfolio. And like, what can you do to incentivize them and just build out that channel thesis?
So you were really the perfect fit for Brex. My question though would be like, how did you know that Brex was the perfect fit for you? Like, how did you know it was the right leap? And it was, as you said, like that fat pitch that came.
Yeah. So I think there's a great book by Annie Duke. Have you read it?
Thinking in Bets?
Yes. Again, like we're kind of have a theme here about like gambling and gambling games, but you know, we don't have to dive too much.
Very VC tech bro of us.
Yes. Yes. So I think there's something called, she goes over decisioning, which is like when you make when you decide how good an outcome is based on the result rather than the decision that went into it. So actually, people don't even know, and we haven't even touched on it yet, that I was at another startup before I jumped into investing. Teespring, exactly. You know.
Legendary one.
And actually, one of the things, like one of the great mysteries of our time, actually, I believe, is the fact that Teespring as a company it wasn't as big or as successful as we all wanted, but the talent there has gone on to do really interesting things. So Keith Raboy and Sam Altman of OpenAI, before he was the CEO of OpenAI, he was on the board of a t-shirt company. People don't really talk about that or know that.
Did not know that.
And my good friend Jack Altman, who's the CEO of Lattice, obviously was at Teespring as well.
Matt Hayes too, right?
Matt Hayes, yes, another great VC that we love. So the reason I bring it up is I think the way I made the decision on Brex was I wanted to go to a company that had tailwinds, was in a massive market. And then the third thing is I think when you jump into operating, you need to have a mentor or rabbi or someone looking out for you at the company. Because unless you're the founder, it's very hard, I think, to like just come in as a new person and have your voice be heard. And so those 3 decision points were true about Teespring. Jack Altman was a mentor, friend of mine, big market and tailwinds. In 2013, we were, a Silicon Valley darling. And then that was also true of Brex, big market in payments, massive tailwinds with the people. Like if you knew, you knew, right? Like my mom was like, you went from hawking t-shirts to hawking credit. Like, what are you doing? Like you're really going back to your...
Just a hawker. I mean,
yeah, just schlocking wares. But it was the same decision. And, Teespring obviously was not as big an outcome as we wanted. And Brex has been, great, as you mentioned, very lucky and very grateful for the ride so far.
Did you consider any other options?
I looked at a few companies. Yes, I did consider a few other companies, but like never got to the point of crafting the role as it did with Brex.
And so, I feel like when people are making the jump from VC to operating, we all have that like mentality of like, we can poke out the holes, like what's wrong with the business potentially. But I'd like to believe as well that at least most good investors are able to read people And I've heard a lot of great things about Enrique and Pedro. Like, what was it about them that stood out to you? Why did you want to bet your career on those two people?
I think that when you meet Enrique and Pedro for the first time, you're immediately pretty impressed with their presence. At the time, right, I was at a family office working for like a pretty experienced team, and everything there was about experience, experience, experience. And then you meet Enrique, and at the time he's 23, and he's telling me, here's what we're going to do this year, next year, the year after, and how we're going to build a $100 billion global payments company. And he's calm, and he just has the vision. And obviously I knew it wasn't going to happen exactly like that, but to see someone talk so clearly about how and why they believe their company will be successful, it really struck me. In the first meeting, I basically said, hey, why do you think this card for startups is going to work? And he kind of paused and he was like, look, there are in the US over 50, and now there's probably 100, $10 billion plus financial product companies. And it's a very fragmented market. So I believe we found a niche and we're going to run with it. But we're not talking about one behemoth incumbent. We're talking about a messy, fragmented market.
That's just such an important insight, by the way, going after absolutely massive markets that are super fragmented. And ideally, you have a North Star that you can go after. And it feels like you guys looked at these other companies, knew there was a fat gross profit pool, and then attacked it with a 10x better product.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the thing that has been really interesting for me is to watch Brex's positioning in market change. And actually, I've kind of tried to help a bit on that in terms of, hey, so the first product, because any company's first product that's successful, you kind of don't think about positioning. It sort of falls into place with a PMF, right? The first subway signs, or actually rather billboards, was Brex, the card for startups. And people were like, never heard of this company, but I'm a startup. Like maybe I'll, take a look. But then we're like, okay, now we're serving bigger companies. Now we have a software product. Now we're doing global. And you have to really think about your positioning by segment and what's that niche that you want to go after. And so I actually recommend everyone read this book called Positioning by Jack Trout, which Enrique told me to read a few years ago when I was kind of helping with this.
I think you also recommended a few other books about positioning and launching new products to me. I mean, it feels like you're just a voracious reader at this point in time.
I think so. I think I read a lot, but I actually feel that I like to learn mostly from talking to people and meeting people. So it's like, okay, I want to talk about enterprise, or no, I want to talk about chief business officer, that role that I have, and how do other people do it well. And so I'm going to call Connor Thielman. I'm going to call Brandon Deere. I'm going to talk to the people who have done the role. And our good friend Ryan Schmeiser says that, I don't think it's a compliment actually, but he said I have a really good ability to brain drain people. Just sit with someone for 45 minutes and it's just tell me everything you know about what you're good at, and I just eat it up.
I actually think that's the leading indicator for success.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, the best founders you've probably ever met, or the best operators, they're not afraid to bring a beginner's mind into conversations, and they just are constantly on the hunt for more information. And I worry whenever I meet people who don't do that, can they be successful? Or I also wonder, why are they not reaching out? What is it that's holding them back?
Yeah, and I think kind of circling back to the first theme or question around VC versus operating, how to be successful. I think it is cliche, but I think there really is the ability to get your hand, you really need to be willing to get your hands dirty. So it's okay, you're going to a company, now you're, when I went to Brex, it was okay, yeah, I was doing the VC channel go to market, but I was also doing accounting firms and dental vendors. And so I'm going to a dental office and being hey, what are the tools you use? And do you want a credit card? Mm-hmm. And it's sort of that's not as sexy as maybe, being the armchair advisor to the CEO of a $10 billion company, which is, how you spend your day, Jason. But for me, I'm getting my hands dirty. I'm on construction sites, hawking credit. I'm kind of doing stuff. And I think some VCs, some love it. I think you've started a few companies and you love getting your hands dirty, but I think some VCs might like the idea of it, but in like actually, because it's exhausting.
It's hard. I mean, to be fair, by the way, I think I helped with a pivot that led to a $2 billion dental company. So I've spoken to dentists too.
Yes.
But no, no,
I said that. I said you've had several companies.
So yeah, I mean, I want to like rewind. I mean, when you and I got into venture, there was probably 50 people in the New York tech ecosystem that were in VC. We used to all have dinner with each other, we'd share deals, et cetera, et cetera. Fast forward to today, you go to these events and you're like, it feels like there's 1,000+ people in the New York tech ecosystem, just in like venture at the junior level alone. Yeah. There's going to be a ton of shakeout in the next couple of years. I mean, there has to be. Either people are going to leave because they don't want to be investing and go through the hard times, or they're going to be forced to leave. I mean, what advice would you have for somebody that wants to leave and go operate, and should more of these investors go and operate?
Totally agree with you. It was amazing to go to your summit this year. I was like blown away by the number of people, and it was a great event. And I'm thinking that versus the Table Talk series that you and Jason Fiedler used to do, and the famous go-kart trip. With Brex. I'm sure you remember that. Some of those people now are some of the biggest GPs in New York. Yes. So I would say I agree with you that there's going to be a shakeout. I think for these young investors who've kind of gone into VC because it's a great job, you get a lot of, you see a lot of things, you get a lot of optionality. I think the earlier they know whether they want to do this as their life's work or not, the better. And if it's not, I don't think they should stay longer to say, oh, I want to get to the principal level and then jump to a company. If it's not, then they should do kind of what I did, meet as many founders as they can, with, of course, doing their day job of finding the best investments, but also thinking, hey, like, would I join any of these companies? And I think when you say join those companies, there's actually a great tweet by, I saw this weekend, actually, one of the El Segundo founders, which I'm fanboying. I actually don't know any of them, but I appreciate their content. I need to drive down from LA to El Segundo.
They're going to reach out to you after this, by the way.
I hope they do. But basically they were like, just make the leap, like go and talk to someone and be like, just join, how can I help you? How can I join your team? Throw work at me versus like, hey, let's have a conversation about transitioning and career paths and all that. I think if like the best companies like a Dandy, like a Brex, Enrique was not like, when I went to him, I was like, hey, I want to join. Here are my strengths. What do we do? It wasn't, hey, like, I'd love to review the JD again. Like I had these edits in red line and like now we're on the same page, because founders want to know that people that join know that their job is going to change 7 times.
Totally. And by the way, I feel like VCs fit into 1 of 2 buckets when they go and operate. They either go in and they expect a completely different process and like want to like ask all of the questions and like feel like they're better than the average candidate. And then you have people like you who come in who are clearly super hungry, super malleable, and like want to win. And I think when founders hear that, they don't have the preconceived notions about VCs going into operating that they might have otherwise.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate that compliment. I think some of the things that make me a good operator made me, not as talented a VC as yourself. Like the desire to want to make progress and like iterate and try to like do something every day that pushes things ahead leads me to be highly impatient, which I don't think is a good character trait for an investor.
Well, speaking of character traits from investors and also on the operating side, I spoke to Tyler Robinson, one of your former coworkers.
Yes, love that guy.
Who mentioned that in partnerships, but it also sounded like internally, when you don't agree with something, you're not afraid to be blunt. How do you really balance being blunt and being effective?
Part of my success at Brex has been also like the fact that our culture is one of directness and bluntness, I would say. I think the way that I actually balance it well is the following. I form personal relationships with my cross-functional counterparts that then allow me to be blunt. So as an example, one of the other very talented leaders at Brex, who Erica Dorfman, she and I work very closely. She's now VP of product for a card. And I'm very direct and blunt to the extent some people are like, whoa, like you and Erica are going at it like brother and sister. And I think that's a feature, not a bug, because the fact that we have dinner, that we've known each other for, now we've known each other for many years, allows me to be blunt over time. I'm not going to be that direct with someone I don't know at the company. And I'm not going to be that direct or blunt with someone who's not as senior as me, because I don't want them to feel that I'm chiding them. But someone my level, I'm going to come with a direct punch in the face.
So, I mean, I guess it sounds like in the early days, you were really leaning into like, how do I build trust? How do I build psychological safety with these people?
Yes.
It meant getting together outside the office and also bringing like a sense of curiosity to the conversations in the early days and like not judgment. And then eventually you earn the right to be more blunt.
Yeah, people want to be brought along. So it's like on partnerships, that is the most sales job, frankly, I think there is, more than sales, because you need to bring internal and external stakeholders. So we were going to do a big partnership early on. We did this big partnership with JetBlue to transfer miles.
Michael Tannenbaum said you're the mastermind of that.
I don't want to say mastermind, but yes. Basically on that, it was like, okay, we need to get the tech resources to learn how to transfer miles. I'm not just going to send a Slack to an engineer or even the engineering manager. I'm going to sit down and be like, look, here's why JetBlue and Brex, 1 + 1 is 3. Your team building this integration is the key here. Will you sign up for this journey with me? Like, we're going to have glory on the other side. Let me take you with me on this magic carpet ride. And people are like, all right, like I'm buying what this guy's selling. And like, now I'm going to support him. When someone asks me, why are we doing JetBlue and not doing, this improvement to the card control, here's why we're doing it. And I think people don't do that enough. They write a document, maybe they meet with the CEO, and then they just assume it will trickle down.
By the way, that's a skill that most VCs don't have, is being able to handle bureaucracy and trying to be super thoughtful about like, what stakeholders do I ultimately need to win over in order to get the job done? And you really were focused on how do I get the outcome that I want and didn't care about all the other stuff before that.
Yeah, I think Pedro says this is a key tenet of Brex is leaders need to operate on all levels. So I should be meeting with the underwriting associate related to my partnership. Well, over time, I teach my people to do this, but to say, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's exactly how it should go. Do you have questions? Here's why it's important to Brex and all of that. Not just, hey, when you see this type of company, do this, because people like context. People want context.
Well, I guess to talk about that JetBlue partnership and like partnerships more broadly for a second, I had heard that you sometimes will reach out to a company for a partnership or for a business development opportunity, and they reject you, but you don't really care. And like 2-3 weeks later, maybe a month later, you'll go back into a different department in order to get that deal done. How do you know when to keep pushing versus just taking your foot off the gas and saying, okay, this is a massive market, I'm going to go find somebody else to go talk to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a fine line between being pushy and just having persistence and grit.
Yeah.
I think honestly, I do a pretty good job. So I think number one, I never send more than 2 emails to someone. So it's like, hey, should we do this? And they're like, hey, not sure if you saw this. And then that's it. Because like, come on, like, let's be real. Like if you ignore 2 emails from someone who seems like they had a good, thoughtful email about it, then like, let's move on.
They're ghosting you.
They're ghosting. Yeah. And I've been ghosted by many people.
Over the years, of course, we all have.
We all have. You just have to keep moving. My confidence is actually more fragile than it might seem, Jason. So I think on the department side, that is tricky, but the way I do that when I've done it, and I don't do it often because I do think it can blow up in your face, is you reach out to one department and then you go to the other department, you say, hey, like, not sure if you're the right point of contact for this, but I'm trying to build this partnership and here's 2 sentences on why, and then see what they say. And if they loop, sometimes they've looped me back to the initial department, which is like a very obvious, like, all right, like we're not doing this. And sometimes it's like, oh, you're talking to this person, but not that. And I think the learning there is don't assume that these companies, it's funny to say, but like, don't assume that companies are that there's that great communication between all departments that like this department knows that it's not a good fit. Because I see that all the time. I get hit up by vendors who want to sell Brex stuff, and I try to be helpful because I feel for them. And it's like, okay, like they send it to me, I could just delete it, or I could send it to the engineering on KYC and say, hey, like, do you want to look at this vendor? And so that's the kind of equivalent of what I'm doing when I'm going to one person than the other, is to say like, is it the right person, and let the right person make the decision versus the wrong person.
To shift gears for a second, I mean, you guys are in a market where there's 2 large companies now on the startup world. There's many more large companies in the broader ecosystem. How do you think about competition, and tactically, internally, like how do you try to get people to be thinking about competition? Is it, I'm just going to look straightforward and execute on my day to day, or are you guys really trying to learn from everything that everybody's trying to do in the ecosystem?
So I think the way we approach competition is we want to understand what other people are doing. And we were obviously first to market with our startup card and our startup bank account, but there's a bunch of very talented teams operating in the space. And so I think we want to understand what they're doing and why. So it's like one of them comes out with this partnership in this space. It's like, like, are we already operating in that space? Why aren't we? And like, let's be thoughtful. But we're not necessarily or ever changing the roadmap based on what we see competition. I do think that our competition has made us better.
Oh yeah, two competitive teams running at it. Like you guys keeps you going every single day, I imagine. Yes. Although you're a competitive guy to begin with. So you mentioned the challenges of going from, a first product into a platform before. Like, how do you guys validate your hypotheses or come up with the new products and decide what to launch and move into?
We have a saying to meet the customer where they are. So I think we basically do it by seeing it's kind of sounds obvious, but what are our customers asking for? What are they already using, even though it's not a perfect fit? So when we launched our software product with like enhanced controls and global issuance and all these things, it was because, hey, there were companies that were bigger than our ICP that were already signing up or wanting to talking to our sales reps and then signing up, even though, my positioning thesis and my branding wasn't for them. They're like, great, you're a card for startups, but actually you have the controls I need. And I'm a 1,000-person company with offices in Mexico and, London. And so it was like, we have like 20% of what they need and they're using us for some of their employee base. Like, why don't we double down here? And what's the reasons to, and then the reasons not to? Like, okay, are we seeing this from other customers? And let's do that research. I do think that it's a very challenging problem. When you're going from one product to platform, it's like, what is the next product? And I think you really want to build with your customers. And so what I meant by what I said is like, it was that company is slightly outside of our ICP at the time because we were serving 500-person companies, but it wasn't like a 50,000-person company. So you want to be, I think we were successful because we kind of built up with our customer base and kept asking them, hey, like, what do you need now? What do you need now? What could be good now?
I mean, that makes a ton of sense to me. I mean, it also sounds to me that you guys are customer obsessed and are constantly in those communications trying to figure out like, what do these people need in order to make this a 10x better product? And ideally you'll have much more than 100% net revenue retention.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we look at Amazon as one of the companies we like Enrique and Pedro want to like emulate a lot of that.
Every best founder I've met, I feel like has that mentality and they always quote Bezos.
Quote Bezos, and obviously, yes, it's a bit cliche, but I think the thing about anecdotal evidence is kind of circling back. Obviously, I was successful at Brex because I had built a really good network, including with you in New York and elsewhere. I mean, like Jason, I'm sure you might not remember, but you reintroduced me to Warby Parker last year, and we signed a massive deal with them 6 months later. So
love to hear that. That's why you flew all the way to New York just to do this with me.
Yeah, some
Steve
people
Miller?
call you one of the great SDRs of Brex. Maybe you'll get customer or advisor of the month.
And Brex is going to be sponsoring my wedding, so it all works out.
But basically, I think we take anecdotal evidence, jokes aside, very seriously. So if one of these people I know texts me and says, hey, like I'm having this problem, what the heck? Or like, I don't like this experience, I bubble it up to the right team and talk about being blunt. I say like, look, here's a customer texting me saying this. And like, I don't care if it's, fine, it's like number 17 on what we're trying to build this quarter, but like, should we talk about it? Is it actually more important? And like, we don't need to like change everything based on one story, but you do want to, again, meet the customer where they are.
All right, a couple more minutes on business stuff, and I want to dive into a couple personal things. But
let's do it.
What the heck is a chief business officer, and where does the line divide between chief business officer and chief revenue officer?
I think the chief business officer usually and I guess talking to Connor it's different at every company, but at Brex, I'm in charge of revenue-based partnerships and corporate development, M&A, fundraising. And essentially, I think it's a role and title that allows you to be extremely external and meet, go to a conference, speak on panels, meet with our biggest investors, meet other investors, while simultaneously being able to broker partnerships with large companies. that the role, I haven't seen it hold a revenue number specifically like a sales team rolls up, but I'm sure it could. Yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Nice.
It's a business. I'm just doing business.
Of course. I mean, that's why VCs turned operators. They all have chief strategy officer, chief business officer type titles because we can't do anything tactically and everything else. But
No comment on that.
So you and Michael Tannenbaum, who you mentioned earlier, are investing some on the side now as, I think is it Mishpacha?
It is Mishpacha LLC.
Love that. My favorite co-investors in the world. So now that you've gone through this journey at Brex, when you're evaluating talent and companies, like how has your perspective changed?
Yeah, so I think kind of circling back to what I said at the beginning, the investing me and Michael are doing for Mishpacha is pre-seed seed investing. It's really earliest stage. Hey, like let's tinker with go to market. This team looks good. We have a product, but like we have like 6 people using it. Where I think what I've learned at Brex around focusing on one segment, really doubling down on your positioning, figuring out like mapping with the founder, where is the channels we should go after first for revenue, and like let's only focus on like 1 or 2. That's very different from like, hey, I'm in a data room for a Series E company, and like what do the cohorts look like, and like, you know, that like the late stage stuff that I didn't really love as much.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me. I was told that you guys get given a book at Brex, Crossing the Chasm. Every executive has to read it. If you were to start a company tomorrow, what book would you make people read and why?
That's a really hard question.
You can give me a recommendation later.
I'll give you something that I've read recently, shockingly, that I, you know, for my brand, because I do think you have a personal brand. It's shocking that I haven't read it earlier, but I read the book Never Eat Alone. And I actually met Keith, the author, recently. And I think that one is a really good book because one of the things he touches on is, and I think this is changing, is that like networking was always viewed as like a negative thing until recently. And I think it's now, and what he says, which I believe greatly, is being authentic and still being purposeful about who you reach out to is okay. So it's like, okay, yes, I'm going to talk to this person because I do believe there's a partnership with Brex or they'd be a good customer, but I'm being authentic and like, yeah, I still like this person. I want to have dinner. Doesn't mean that they can't help me. But I think a lot of times people say, oh, like you have an agenda and you're disingenuous. And it's like, no, you're out in the open. And like, you know me, I've pulled up Brex hawking it at every dinner that you've been
Totally. I mean, but that, at the end of the day, it's because like, I think we get attracted to very genuine people and want to help other people. And like that, I think ends up leading to a lot of this like shared success. I feel like as we've kind of gotten older. Last couple questions here. So I remember, I think it was like 2021, like we were down in Miami and you had arrived at this Brex party during Art Basel, like fresh off an airplane. I think you had a meeting in New York like that afternoon. And I remember looking at you and I was like, why the heck are you here? Like, what is it that motivates you to want to show up in person, and what motivates you day to day right now?
The reason I showed up there was that there wasn't going to be any executive sponsors at that party. And Michael actually called me that day and said, hey, I need you to go to Miami. It's a party, but actually there's a ton of founders there. And like, this is important for our brand. We're spending a lot of money on this event. Can you fly down? And I said, well, you know, it's actually my anniversary with my girlfriend at the time the next day, but yeah, I'll fly down for the night. And I think the reason I do that and the reason I did that, like I was just in London for 48 hours for a partnership that's very important, is because I think that like people really value showing up. And when you do that, when you take the time to go there, like you kind of force yourself to have an impact. Like I'm like, okay, I'm at this party. I better like get someone to sign up for Brex or do something or help someone in a way that is beneficial. And like, I never know why, but it always seems to, like, if I reflect 3 months later, it was worthwhile.
Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense. New York tech or LA tech, which one are you longer on?
You know, I think LA tech is up and coming. There's some really cool businesses being built there, but I think, yes, it is maybe like 5 to 10 years behind New York, kind of maybe like LA is where New York was in 2017, but we're on the rise. There's some great VCs there. I'm sure you know Will Cofield at Riot, another Boston guy. He's doing his thing.
Speaking of change order, you know, a few years ago, your father passed away, Stuart Levy. I think he was called the father of antibiotic stewardship when I read his obituary. Like, what are some of the lessons that you learned from him?
He's my biggest inspiration, my father. I have a photo of him in my office that I look at every day, and it's actually from Time Magazine when he was like there was a cover story on antibiotic resistance. What I take from him is he was a risk taker, and he was deeply passionate about something, and he kept grinding on it for 20 years. So for him, it was about antibiotic resistant bacteria and making sure people didn't abuse them, meaning you don't give people antibiotics when they don't need them because it leads to bigger and badder bacteria. And so he was on this campaign for 20 years, and people ignored him for a while, and then eventually they started taking him seriously, and he built a company around it. And so the first thing I take is persistence. Then the second is risk taking. He built this company, Paratech Pharmaceuticals, which was a public company. It was now sold. But I think the third thing that I take as a lesson from him was he was very involved in the science, but less so on the business side. And I think that at certain times in the rise of that company in particular, if he had been involved in the business, maybe other decisions have been made, because I think my father was one of the smartest, most thoughtful people out there. So I think the third lesson is actually get involved in other people's stuff, be cross-functional, like be in other people's shit. Because once you're given that authority to have that, when you need to do your job, when I got to Brex, I'm just like doing my job, I'm heads down. But once you've gained the respect and the mutual respect of your cross-country cross-party counterparts, they kind of want your opinion.
Totally. I mean, that's a thing that is earned over time. That's absolutely beautiful, though, that all those things you learned from him. Sounds like he was an incredible guy.
Yes, we were very, very close.
Where'd you get your business acumen from then?
I don't want to say he was also business forward, but I think in college I spent a lot of time studying and meeting people that were like very, very focused on economics and business, and like had started companies. I went to Princeton, and there's like a lot of interesting people there. So, there's an entrepreneurship club. There was a bunch of things where you could be like, okay, like this is interesting. And then, I spent the first 3 years out of school at Centerview Partners, which is, amazing learning and training ground for investment banking. And I think the people there are real winners. So there's actually a funny story from investment banking that I'll tell you. I don't know if it's going to make it on the pod, but
it should.
Before Brex, it's the place I worked where I felt like there was the most winner mentality and hustle. Like that Blair Efron, who runs the firm, he gets on a plane to anywhere in the world at a moment's notice for a client. And so basically there was, we had been up for days turning this pitch deck for a large biotech pharma company that we were pitching on a M&A deal. And this is in 2011. So Centerview wasn't what it is today, which is one of the biggest companies by like M&A on the league tables. And it said, hey, partners have advised on, it was like, okay, so it's 9 a.m. I've been in the office all night. We go to the partners and it's like, hey, Centerview has advised on 3 out of the 4 largest biotech transactions this year for X hundred billion. Okay. And the partner there, we're sitting here, our face is haggard, me, the associate, the VP, and he just looks at that slide and he's just like, I still can't believe we didn't get that other one. And it's like, that's what he's thinking about. We're talking about, there's like 20 partners at the firm. The revenue per partner back then was so high, and he's worried about the 1 out of 4 that he didn't get. And I think like that's the type of intensity that that Centerview had, but also that I think helped me learn business acumen there, and then also people at Brex have. Like there's a true desire, deep desire to win and to hustle and be persistent that is, it's not for everyone.
I do always wonder when you're meeting founders and looking to invest in them, or you're interviewing for a job, how to like truly suss that out.
I don't think it's possible over one meeting. And that's why, going back to, why I think your job is hard is that you're going out there, you're trying to find these founders, and you need to, I don't know how you do it to build, let's talk about how you built a differentiated brand in New York tech.
I don't know if I built a differentiated brand, but a lot of persistence, a lot of late nights, and like a deep desire to win. And I think at the same time, and like having known you now for many, many years, it's just like, how do you bring community together? How do you do right by people? And how do you help other people be successful without ever anticipating that something else is going to come your way? but you just do it because maybe one day something could end up happening. And it's been magical watching so many of our friends that you've already mentioned, climb up the ranks and run funds, start their own funds, become executives, become founders, et cetera, et cetera. And I just believe in karma at the end of the day.
Totally. Like I will meet with anyone for 15 minutes. Like I even meet with people who, and Connor Thielman actually told me this too. Like if someone sends me a cold LinkedIn message and it actually is like thoughtfully written and isn't just like, hey, like let's speak, I will take 15 minutes and say, here's my number, call me at this time. And it's kind of a test because it's like, hey, I have these 15 minutes on the way back from the airport, whatever. And like, people do that. And then besides that, I just like being helpful. And I think it's absolutely right. I think people who are too tit for tat of like, it's called like, I have an executive coach who says like looking at relationships like a bank account, like what did you take out, what did you take in? You have to be a little bit like that, but not too much. And I think if you are mostly helpful, then you just have the reputation of being helpful. And then, back to Mishpacha, we've gotten some great deal flow from just the fact that with these founders where we're the smallest check on the cap table, we're making a ton of intros and then we're helping them with go to market and then they're bringing in someone.
I also think one thing that you just said that's really important for people to know, like I didn't, grow up in the venture capital industry or the venture backed company in just like world. I just like shot cold emails out. And I remember people responded to me, they paid it forward. And then in my career, Moshe Lifshitz at Shrug Capital sent me a cold email, wanted to get together. We have a guy who works here now. There's a couple of salespeople and different executives at companies. The same thing has happened where if you're willing to shoot your shot, shout out to David Berkman for teaching me no's are free.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
You're gonna get a response because I think most people by nature want to help each other. And so just go ahead and like send that good LinkedIn message or send that cold email.
But I think that's the thing, Jason, you and I, we spend so much time. I remember the first early days of Brex, I would be sitting home on the weekend, just like crafting the cold email for a partner that I wanted to work with, because that first touch is so critical, especially when you're the small fish. Like that's the other thing about partnerships. And this is like true about anything in the world. Like you kind of have to know where you fit versus the person on the other side of the table. And you have to be egoless about it. Like this is a huge company that's way more important and much better than Brex. And Michael Tannenbaum always says this, like, I don't think these people care about us. Like, do they even care? And it's like a good way to think, because then when you're sending that email, you know exactly what to say. Like, hey, we're Brex, insert like very fancy big metric. Like that's how I do it. Like I'm chief business officer of Brex.
Totally.
The $12 billion global payments platform. Okay, that sounds interesting. Like I'm like someone at a big company. Cool. Okay, and then what's the pitch? Like I think that Brex could integrate with you in this way for this time. Like, do you think this is interesting? Like, are you the right person?
I also wonder if enough people do enough research on the people they're reaching out to, because you can usually find like what motivates people, what are their incentives, and then play to that psychologically to get in the door.
Absolutely. And the warm intro is obviously, like we're talking about the cold intro, but even with the warm intro, you want to make it. And Sam Blond, who was the CRO at Brex for a while, said this recently, like when I get investor intros to companies or any intros to anyone, like you need to make it as easy as possible. And so many times I get frustrated by like, hey, Art, can you make an intro to these 4 people? It's like, okay, send me 4 separate emails that I just hit forward to. And I'm not being rude by saying that. Like people need to do the work and I do it for other people. Like that's the only way to get shit done.
And by the way, that never ends in your career. Like you still do it. You send me emails that are forwardable. I always add a nice blurb at the top. I send you emails. You add a nice blurb at the top. And it's just like, it constantly goes.
Yeah, you need to remove the friction. It's just remove the friction. So you're on the move because you're a super important guy. Like you hit forward and then like Warby Parker signs up 3 months later.
Yeah. I mean, if there's a takeaway that I would have from like this whole conversation, I think it's that it doesn't matter if you're just starting or you're at this point in both of our careers, you still need to do the little things like sending the cold email to people, like getting those meetings where you can go out and you can learn as much as you can, because you never know what it'll do for you, your career, and your learnings in the long run.
Absolutely. Like, I don't know about you, but I enjoy the IC work part of my job the most. And now you obviously lead primary, big team, and I'm sure obviously you're still writing the checks, that's most of your job, but I have to manage teams and do all this other stuff. But I enjoy still the most writing that cold email, asking you for an intro to this partner, doing the pitch deck for the partnership, more so than kind of the other stuff.
Totally. Well, speaking of asks, really appreciate your time. Any asks for people in the audience?
Well, I guess like an ask for you, Jason, is like, obviously Primary is scaled to be a very successful VC, hired a lot of folks. Just curious if you guys are ready to give Brex a shot at your business.
That's a great question. Our CFO is right upstairs. I'll introduce you to him while you're on your way out the door.
Perfect. I'm sure I'll have your support. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Appreciate it, man.